The night before we got ready to get married, he chose to stay overnight at his ex-girlfriend's house. When I returned, I tactfully told him to leave. He ended up wearing the engagement ring he had prepared for me on her finger. I was disheartened and decided to leave. But he went crazy. It was pouring rain with thunder and lightning that night. I huddled under the covers and called Steve dozens of times, but he didn't answer. In a last-ditch effort, he finally picked up. I was trembling with fear as I timidly asked a question. After waiting for almost 15 seconds, there was still no sound on the other end of the line. "It's you." Just as I started to speak, a soft, gentle voice came from the other end of the line. "Who is this? Why don't you speak when you answer the phone?" She seemed to be teasing him, pretending to grab the phone from him. "Oh, never mind." I subconsciously glanced at the screen, naively wondering if I had dialed the wrong number. Then, a prank call. Steve casually replied, and the next second, he hung up the phone. The busy signal pierced through my eardrums and struck my heart. He was truly with her. I should have been able to guess, but I just didn't want to admit it. That girl he loved through and through, how could I ever replace the place she held in his heart? Suddenly, all the noise outside seemed to fade away from my awareness. Maybe he never really loved me. If he wanted to be with me, he would have been with me long ago. Why wait until after breaking up with his ex-girlfriend to quickly start dating me and get married? In the end, I wasn't even a substitute, I was just a tool. That night, I slept lightly. I kept thinking about our college days, when it was just him and me against the world. No matter what happened, he was always there for me. But now, he was the one who hurt me the most. The next morning, Steve came home reeking of alcohol. There was a hint of weariness in his eyes, and the bright pink lipstick marks on his collar stood out remarkably. "Did you stay up all night?" He looked puzzled at me as I casually ate breakfast as if nothing had happened. It seemed like he was waiting for me to confront him or to make a scene. "So, let's play along." I put down my spoon and asked calmly, "Where were you last night?" Steve took a deep breath, threw his coat on the sofa, and gave a cold laugh. "You know damn well. It was me who purposely answered the phone last night." Although he was the one in the wrong, his attitude showed nothing but disdain from a higher ground. I picked up the porcelain bowl of porridge from the table and threw it at him. "Then why did you come back?" I asked sarcastically asking if you left your precious one behind? Of course, you wouldn't. There were my documents on the living room coffee table. We were supposed to register for marriage today. Steve clenched his jaw, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You deluded yourself into thinking I would marry you?" After waiting for a long time, he finally dropped the facade. "Childhood sweethearts, so what? It's nothing more than a joke now." What I got in the end was his humiliation. I wasn't indispensable, Steve. Soon after, Steve proved to me that he was a decisive and ruthless person. The following wedding was also cancelled. 2 weeks ago, Susan suddenly returned from abroad. This was the turning point in his attitude towards me. Unexpectedly, when she returned to the country, the first person she saw wasn't Steve. It was me. Seeing her provocative and confident expression, I knew she had come to taunt me. "Your wedding probably won't proceed as planned." Her words felt like poisoned soft daggers, causing a sensation of slow, painful death. "I'm back, and he definitely won't marry you." She remained confident and composed, able to deal with anything effortlessly. "What makes you think he can't get over leaving the one who abandoned him?" After all, only I knew how much pain he was in back then. Susan took a sly sip of coffee, a confident and shallow smile playing on her lips. "Just wait and watch." I must admit, I felt intimidated. The presence of a first love was like a ticking time bomb. Susan probably already went to see Steve. Like she said, Steve, who never came home early, didn't return until late at night. There were sudden urgent matters at the office, overtime work. Such evasive excuses were now being directed at me. "Are you working late again tomorrow?" Steve couldn't meet my eyes, muttered with guilt. For several days in a row, I let him go see Susan without questioning him when he returned. Gradually, his attitude towards me became more and more perfunctory and distracted. Until one day, he came back and inexplicably blew up at me, and I realized that Susan must have intervened. Steve, barely containing his anger, asked me, "Don't you have anything to tell me?" It felt like I had done something unforgivable. I was speechless. It was the first time Steve lost control in front of me, his fingers pinching my chin, his eyes bloodshot. "You forgot everything you did?" His grip tightened, contorting my face. I closed my eyes tightly, tears welling up from the intense pain. I struggled and slapped him. "Are you out of your mind? What did Susan say to make him completely disregard our years of friendship? You're the one who's crazy." He stormed out, slamming the door. I wanted to find out what happened, but his distrustful look made it unnecessary in an instant. Since then, my relationship with Steve hit rock bottom. Later, on the day Steve got drunk at her house, it happened to be her birthday. Since he told me to get out, there was no point in staying and pretending everything was fine. Fortunately, I had bought a small house for myself earlier, so at least I had somewhere to go. After walking out of that door the day I moved out of the marital home, Susan showed up at the doorstep with a suitcase. I thought to myself, well, isn't this convenient? We exchanged a few seconds of meaningful glances, each harboring our own thoughts. Her mouth turned down, and she said meekly, "I'm sorry, I didn't expect things to end up like this." I found it hard to decipher the emotions hidden in her expression, unsure of how to respond. Wasn't this exactly what she wanted? Had I misjudged her all this time? Was Susan, who seemed gentle and warm-hearted, truly changed? She only came back for one reason, to get Steve back. How ridiculous is that? Don't tell me you're still unsatisfied. I still remember that after Susan and Steve broke up 2 years ago, he wandered around aimlessly for quite some time. I couldn't believe it either. Susan seemed to love Steve more than what we saw, but they broke up because he refused to go abroad with her after the breakup. Susan didn't even try to come back to him once. She cut him off completely. Maybe it was witnessing Susan's decisiveness that made me realize he was different. Out of the blue, he suddenly appeared before me as if nothing had happened. There was no trace of heartbreak in his demeanor. As someone who had secretly admired him for so long, I thought I finally had a chance. And so, we started seeing each other naturally. Until he earnestly proposed, not even half a year later, I still believed we would be together forever. I chuckled to myself, who would have thought it would end up like this? Steve hurried over to bring Susan inside, clearly indicating that I should make room. His icy gaze was now solely directed at me. "You haven't done anything wrong, no need to apologize to her." Then what did I do wrong? I retorted, with all my luggage laid out in the living room. Susan glanced over, already starting to assume the role of the lady of the house. She told Steve, who was watching coldly, "Steve, help Daisy out a bit." Seeing Steve sitting still, Susan set down her bag and walked straight to my pile of luggage. I hesitated for a moment. What kind of performance was she planning this time? "You rest, I'll handle it." Steve nervously helped Susan to the sofa and gently patted her head. The two of them exchanged affectionate glances in front of me, leaving me feeling like a joke. If I had known, I would have preferred to stay in the childhood sweetheart stage. Just as Steve was about to go help with the luggage, I took the initiative and grabbed it first. "Don't touch my luggage. It's dirty." Steve tried to meet my eyes dominantly. "What did you say? Say it again." With my lips turning purple, I enunciated slowly, "I don't want to touch it." "Steve, if you want to get back with your ex, just say so. No need to be disgusting about it. I liked you, but I'm not that low to play dirty games, then or now." Steve took a deep breath and pointed at me, "Playing dumb when you knew all along. You said you didn't play dirty. What about 2 years ago?" Just then, Susan coughed softly, seemingly interrupting. I glanced over and saw Susan looking fragile and pitiful. "Did I do something wrong by coming back?" "You didn't." With that, I picked up my luggage and left. I had to thank her for helping me see what a jerk that guy was. I moved back to the small house I had originally planned to sell. Some appliances that hadn't been used for a long time seemed to have given up. I temporarily set up the bedroom and contacted a repairman online. An hour later, the uncle, who's over 50, arrived. Being alone at home, the man inquired if it was a plumbing issue since my clothes were wet. Feeling panic, I instinctively covered my chest. The uncle smirked ambiguously, and without waiting for my answer, he took the liberty to check the water pipes. I hurried to change into a tightly wrapped outfit and left the room door wide open as he inspected. The first thing he did was to size me up. "You've got a serious problem here. It might take a long time to fix," his intuition seemed to warn me. "I'm not fixing it," I insisted firmly. "The call-out fee is $500. Initially trying to overcharge me by $200, he then demanded an exorbitant amount. I couldn't afford it. Threatening to use force, Steve suddenly appeared and threw the toolbox at the man standing by the door. "Touch her and see what happens," Steve forced the man's hand behind his back, veins bulging from his neck. Escorted out by Steve, I was momentarily lost in a daze. He anxiously grabbed my shoulders. "Are you hurt? Why didn't you call me to fix things?" He searched my gaze, but I didn't feel moved at that moment. I pushed his hand away, keeping my distance. Watching the setting sun through the French windows, my eyes reddened a bit. "You show up here without worrying about hurting her feelings?" I taunted. "Why do you have such a sharp tongue? Is it worth choking on your words?" "Ridiculous. And you, how have you treated me? As soon as your ex-girlfriend showed up, you couldn't wait to dump me, afraid that I might cling to you, going as far as doing things that are inhumane." My words angered Daisy. "You have no right to criticize me. Do you not know why Susan broke up with me 2 years ago?" Steve's attitude toward me suddenly changed due to the reason behind Susan's unexpected accusation, leaving me at a loss of how to defend myself. Feeling cold-hearted, I wondered if after knowing each other for nearly 2 decades, he couldn't tell if I was lying or not. "I don't know," Steve yelled, "but she's almost dying." "What?" Shocked, I couldn't believe his words. I had no idea Susan had been battling cancer for 2 years. Yet, I didn't understand why she kept it a secret for so long and decided to accuse me intentionally. Susan had always known about my feelings for Steve. When they came back from a date one day, Steve casually gave me a pendant as a souvenir, and I couldn't help but compare it with the one hanging from Susan's backpack. "Do you like mine?" she inquired. Steve, in a nonchalant tone, replied, "You can't be greedy, you already have one." It's often said not to try turning friendship into a romantic relationship, hence I always kept our boundaries in mind. Before her departure, Susan visited me while she was going through a breakup with Steve. She said a lot of confusing things. "Why didn't you take the chance to be with Steve, Daisy? You met and liked him before me," she asked. "I like Steve, but it doesn't mean I have to be with him," I replied. Surprisingly, Susan seemed to find some resonance in my response. At that time, I didn't know she was going abroad for treatment. I just felt the same love in her eyes for him. "Do you dare?" I asked Susan. "Everything changes," she cryptically replied. Until now, I still don't understand her meaning from back then. Susan's actions made it hard for me to hold grudges against her. "So you're trying to tell me that you treated me that way because of what happened?" Daisy fell silent for a moment, then finally spoke up as I was about to lose patience. "She went through the pain of the illness alone. Do you know how she survived these 2 years? I only found out about Susan's illness today." Daisy seemed doubtful of my fierce reaction. Perhaps he really misunderstood me. "Come back with me, please." He tried to coax me. But I didn't care. When I left, he didn't say a word. That's just how I am. If we choose to be together, then let's love each other properly. If not, I will stay far away without looking back. Leaning against the entrance, shoulders slumped, his eyes rimmed with red veins. "She doesn't have long left. I want to be with her for the remaining time." His voice dropped, almost breaking towards the end. Will you wait for me?" I turned my back to him, didn't try to sneak a peek at his emotions when he said those words to me, only heard a slightly strained voice. "Steve, whom I liked for so many years, I've also waited for so many years. But this time, I won't wait anymore. Before he left, he checked everything inside and out, fixed what needed to be fixed. From evening to deep night, we didn't say a word. Finally, when he closed the door, I felt like I could finally breathe. For the next several days, Steve didn't come to see me. Until one afternoon when I went shopping at the supermarket. In the fruit section, we bumped into each other. He was pushing the shopping cart, and Susan was carefully picking out fruits. She didn't look too good, her heavy makeup couldn't hide her paleness and weakness. Steve obviously saw me first, but he seemed to guess that I would choose to ignore and walk past. What a coincidence, Daisy. Susan smiled and called out to me. I froze, trying my best to remain composed. I thought you didn't like the taste of seafood? Then why buy so much? Steve glanced at my cart, his eyebrows furrowed. I looked at the seafood and smiled silently. Before, I used to subconsciously cater to his preferences. But what he thought were many coincidences were just a fool giving up her likes. What you don't like, you can learn to like, and what you like, you can also stop loving. I think he should have understood both the overt and covert meanings. Even Susan, upon hearing this, shifted her gaze to Steve. He seemed to be avoiding, pretending not to understand the meaning, with a twitch at the corner of his mouth as if wanting to say something but stopping himself. At that moment, two people around us started arguing for some reason, and the scattered shopping carts almost collided in their pushing and shoving. Seeing this, Steve almost instinctively positioned Susan behind him to protect her. I didn't manage to dodge in time and got scraped by the metal edge of the shopping cart. When I realized, Susan was the first to notice my injury. Daisy, are you okay? Steve raised his eyes slightly, his gaze falling on my wound, looking momentarily flustered. How did you get hurt? I clearly saw that I wouldn't bump into you. As he spoke, he prepared to squat down and check my wound. I declined, stepping back, as it was just a scrape and the blood had already clotted. I instinctively didn't want to touch him, catching him off guard. You guys continue shopping, I'll head home first. Not having eaten seafood for a long time, a seafood feast inevitably hit me hard. I was rushed to the hospital with acute gastroenteritis in the middle of the night. Lying on the hospital bed, the slightly chilled medicine flowed into my body through the vein. My brain felt like it was pressed the pause button. It turns out you do get punished for picking up something you liked for so long. The next day at the hospital's payment counter, I ran into Susan. She surprisingly came alone for treatment. Didn't he come? I don't want him to see me like this at the hospital. It was unexpected that there was no animosity between us because of Steve. What happened to you? She pointed to the needle marks on the back of my hand. Bad cooking, upset tummy. She chuckled. When are you free? Let's have a chat. I nodded and said, you pick the time. I didn't know what other topics we could talk about besides Steve. When we sat face to face, finding a way to start a conversation seemed like hitting a dead end. You're more awake than I imagined. Susan looked even weaker than before. Though her face was heavily made up, it couldn't hide her paleness. I looked at her incredulously. Occasionally confused too. I mean falling in love with Steve and marrying him. Susan naturally understood what I meant. I didn't move into your marital home, and I didn't come back this time to fight with you for Steve. I'm here to tell you something you don't know. 2 years ago, Susan and Steve's breakup wasn't just because she was sick. After being diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, Susan had been considering breaking up with Steve back then. Nearing graduation, Steve had already succeeded in his startup. He was confident he could support Susan without her having to work, even disregarding her dreams. Steve prevented Susan from studying abroad, which ultimately made her decide to break up. But what she showed me next was truly shocking and disappointing. Susan showed me dozens of emails Steve sent to her. The content was about things that happened between Steve and me. On May 20, 2016, Daisy and I started dating. It was quite nice to go from childhood friends to lovers. On June 10, 2016, I took her to the restaurant where we used to go together. On December 3, 2016, it snowed for the first time. Isn't the chance of wishes coming true higher for people in love when it snows? Susan, did it snow where you are? On December 17, 2016, it was her birthday, and I proposed. On January 20, 2016, we set the wedding date. Will you come? Steve included a photo of us in each email he sent to Susan. He wasn't trying to show off or get back at Susan for breaking up with him. He just wanted to see her reaction, to see if she still cared about him. He actually used me as a way to test Susan's feelings. At that moment, I didn't know if I should laugh at myself or be angry with him. If it wasn't for Susan telling me, he actually planned to hide it from me forever. You know what? From the first time I saw you, I could tell that Steve didn't see you as just a regular friend. Telling you all this, I also have my own reasons. I just wanted to prove whose place in his heart is more important, yours or mine. As a result, I still have some influence over his decisions. After this, you probably won't be with him. A man who can't choose between two women has no right to happiness. We sat at the coffee shop for hours, and she struggled to speak a lot of words. When she said she just wanted to say goodbye to Steve in her last moments, I gave her some advice. Susan, your last moments should be spent with yourself. After I dropped Susan off at home, I happened to run into Steve. Why are you here to see her? The email incident made me rethink Steve. I stared into his deep and mysterious eyes and said, I wish I never met you. His eyebrows furrowed, his eyes cast down, and there was a sudden heaviness in his breath. Do you know something? I chuckled bitterly. I know your other account isn't for gaming but for sending emails. Steve froze, unsure of how to explain. I'm sorry, Daisy. I admit that my initial motive to be with you was impure, but my love for you is real. He attempted to prove something with a hug, but I stopped him in time. Don't come looking for me again. I blocked all his contacts, even changed jobs. I just don't want to see him anymore. Hopefully, he gets the message. A month after Susan left the city, news of her passing reached me. Steve and I attended the funeral. After the funeral, he insisted on driving me home. He leaned on the steering wheel, immersed in low pressure. His shoulders trembling along with his voice. Steve, you've permanently lost someone who loved you deeply. He dropped me off at the entrance of the neighborhood, and just as I was about to get out of the car, he locked the door. Stay with me for a while. I stayed with him during the time after their breakup, and now with Susan gone, he wanted me to stay with him again. Am I just an emotional trash can for him? Not this time. This is your own matter. Steve's eyes were still red, with a thick shadow in their depths. He turned away, leaving only heavy breathing in the car. In a moment, he unlocked the car door. Without hesitation, I ran back home. As soon as I stepped inside, Steve stood at the door and called my name. Daisy, can you forgive me this time? In my memory, it seems I'm always the one making mistakes. He has always been a rule-abiding person. We met in kindergarten and have been in the same school and class ever since. I was a mischievous child, and Steve was a shy little boy. After I got in trouble, I made him speak for me. Especially when I scored poorly in exams and had to get my parents' signatures. How can I let them know? I could only persuade Steve. A good student like Steve wouldn't allow me to cheat. Grades are just numbers, your parents won't scold you. I jumped up as soon as I heard that. Why wouldn't they? Steve, you have no idea, my dad beats me the hardest. The marks left by the cane were hot and red, taking days to fade. Please help me, this is the last time. I started shedding tears, one from each eye. He usually couldn't bear this and would eventually agree. When our deception was exposed, my dad seemed even angrier than before. If Steve hadn't constantly reasoned with him, I would have faced a severe beating again. Since my poor grades were blamed on the teachers' teaching methods not being suitable for me, I believed if the teachers found out, I would be severely punished. After that, Steve became my little teacher. It's surprising even to me that my grades improved rapidly. Could I attend the same high school and college as you in the future? In our student days, when we talked about something, there was a sparkle in our eyes, a feeling full of warmth and excitement. "You don't need to follow me, we can walk side by side." Back then, Steve never had any selfish thoughts of leaving anyone behind. It wasn't until our senior year in high school that something happened in Steve's family. That was the year when his personality changed completely. Steve's parents had affairs due to living apart for years. Their family was falling apart. The biggest disagreement in their divorce was about who Steve would stay with. But it seemed like everyone was avoiding the responsibility. In his memory, it was all about how much his parents loved him, and then suddenly, he was sentenced to be abandoned. Anyone would find it hard to bear. I had rehearsed in my mind numerous times how to comfort him, but every time I saw his indifferent expression, I couldn't speak. "They don't want you, but I would love to have you," the words jumped out of my mouth uncontrollably. The warm morning sun made my already flushed cheeks even more obvious. The teenage boy, with an expression of disbelief mixed with a hint of shyness, unexpectedly plunged into my eyes that I couldn't avoid. Who would have thought that in the confused age of adolescence, I could say such unreserved words as "I want you"? "It's not what you think," I explained with a forced smile. Steve lowered his head and chuckled at my shy demeanor. "Do you know what I understand the meaning of?" he teased, trying to see if we were on the same page. He pressed on step by step, seeming determined not to let me get away. In the end, with no way out, I managed to slip away. Although I felt embarrassed, at least I made him laugh. When I got home, I hid in my bedroom and dove under the covers. At that moment, my whole body seemed to be on fire. And once cooled down, I seemed to realize something. I had developed feelings for Steve. The youthful joy was so intense that it made me want to hide it. As long as I wasn't rushing to a conclusion, then it would have endless possibilities. Just like what happened between me and Steve later on. Our friends said our relationship was like a roller coaster ride. Childhood friends, lovers, engaged, and now even friends with a bond forced upon us. "Steve, you don't really like me, do you?" The quiet corridor, and the breeze avoiding through. Steve's hand on the door began to retreat. Once emotions get used to floating between two people, they become incomplete. But deep down, his heart still leaned towards Susan. "Daisy, I will make you believe in me again." In my new company, I had become a somewhat well-known architect through certain channels. Steve became the client of the company and specifically requested that I be in charge of the project. Can't even stand working with me? In the meeting room, it was just me and him. Throughout the negotiation process, I only demonstrated diligence and professionalism towards work. The boss repeatedly reminded me to ensure the cooperation concluded perfectly. More than a few people in our circle knew about me and Steve's relationship. Amidst all the interests at play, Steve was adept at using this to his advantage. "Don't worry. I'll do my best to handle the work." Steve seemed quite satisfied, putting in his maximum effort to patiently wait for the day I forgave him. To finish the project with Steve quickly, I worked overtime to progress. I was always the last one to leave the office every day. After learning about this, Steve started coming to the company to urge me to leave work. Seeing this, my colleagues began teasing us. "Steve still hasn't reconciled with our designer Daisy?" Seizing the opportunity, I joked back, "Would you forgive a scumbag?" Everyone was shocked, but in front of the client who everyone had to greet with a smile, they had to suppress their gossiping hearts. I left early and got into the taxi waiting right in front of me. Once inside, I realized something was off. The driver wore a mask and a cap. Without asking where I was going, he locked the doors. "I was wondering how to get you tied up in my car." "Didn't expect you to come to me," he said with a menacing look in his eyes. He took me to a deserted place and held a fruit knife against my neck. Waiting for Steve to arrive. The driver used to be an employee in Steve's company, but out of dissatisfaction with how the company treated him, he wanted to threaten and retaliate against Steve. When Steve arrived, the situation became even more chaotic. He was nervous and afraid, and his hand holding the knife was trembling. The sharp blade scratched my neck. Amidst the standoff between Steve and him, Steve managed to step in front of me. After the police arrived and controlled him, they told me, "Your arm has been cut a few times, you need to go to the hospital. Will you come with me? Since I was injured, I tried not to be too cold towards Steve out of a sense of responsibility. But it seemed that because of that, he misunderstood. As the project ended smoothly, the company prepared a party. Not fond of mingling in social interactions, I hid for a while. I always avoided these kinds of situations. Steve handed me a glass of juice and sat beside me. If you can't handle alcohol, don't force yourself. He tried hard to naturally get closer to me but was disappointed by my distant look. It had been over half a year since we last met. I didn't drink much, so I knew. With half-closed eyes, my body slumped weakly. Did you work all night again yesterday? He knew I had worked overtime at the office yesterday. Seeing my puzzled look, he calmly responded, I passed by and saw the lights in your office were still on. These past few months, Steve occasionally sent care my way. The excuse of just passing by was no longer believable. I'll take you home. Ignoring the gazes of others, Steve draped his coat over me, held my wrist, and led me out of the hall. He shoved me into the passenger seat, aggressively buckled my seatbelt, and gave me a warning look as he stepped back. I can call my own cab, I coldly stated as soon as he sat in the driver's seat. Steve furrowed his brow, gripping the steering wheel tightly with knuckles showing, and said in a low voice, How long are you going to stay mad at me? Mad? I stopped being mad a long time ago. Getting angry harms the liver. Nothing is worth hurting your own body. Is that so? Steve smirked, looks like I've misunderstood. He started the engine and remained focused on driving all the way. I turned my head to look out the window and soon fell asleep. He parked the car below my building and waited until I woke up. I made to get out of the car without saying a word. He stopped me. I know I've done some stupid things to you before, I'm despicable. Can you give me a chance to start over? Steve, a rising star in the business world, who many people admire, was now pleading like this in front of me. But my subconscious told me I wouldn't give him this chance. I had to go. The company gave me an opportunity to study abroad, to meet many big names in the construction industry. The time was set for a week later. He didn't try to hold me back or stop me forcefully. He just silently stayed in the shadow, hiding his emotions. I thought he truly understood what I wanted deep down, and would no longer pester me. It wasn't until he did some extreme things that I realized he was still the same. He hadn't changed at all. In the middle of the night, I received a call from the bartender using Steve's phone. He said Steve had drunk himself unconscious and asked me to pick him up. I called a cab and gave extra money to take him to a hotel. On the night before my departure, I returned home to find him sitting despondently at the door. He heard my footsteps, snapped out of it, and stood up unsteadily. Why are you back so late? He asked. I let out a heavy sigh and replied, had dinner with colleagues. What time is your flight tomorrow? At 9:30. In our brief exchanges, there was a sense of unfamiliarity. Facing him now, we could no longer return to how things used to be. Once a crack appeared, it could never be completely erased. Is this really all we can do now? I chuckled, what else do you want? Steve pressed his tongue against his teeth, his crimson eyes seeming to go wild. I felt something was wrong, but before I could react, he went and sat on the windowsill. Are you forcing me? Steve spread his hands, as if he might fall off at any moment. You said you've liked me for a long time, didn't you? I refuse to let anyone's life be in danger. Steve, this kind of compromise won't work. Upon arrival at the airport, I didn't expect to see Steve waiting in the departure lounge before me. How long are you going? This time, during my study abroad, I could stay in the company's overseas branch or choose to return home. I shook my head, I don't know. I might never come back. Can you? When he was about to finish that sentence, his eyes gradually dimmed, until the boarding announcement came over the loudspeaker. Are you trying to pressure me again? Susan found herself in a similar situation with Steve back then. Steve panicked, no. I knew he had gone through what happened with his parents, feeling that being apart would strain emotional connections. But wasn't he the best example for this? Even if Susan revealed nothing to him, once she appeared in front of him, all the struggles he had forced himself to put aside would completely crumble. He didn't say he would wait for me in the end, nor did he say anything else. I boarded the plane, never looking back at the one I had loved for so long. After landing in London, I familiarized myself with the environment and engaged in learning and networking. The latest chat message from Steve to me ended with his words, "Have a safe trip." Occasionally, I would linger to enjoy the night view of the city. In a moment of distraction, I saw a familiar figure, but my gaze was quickly dispersed by the crowd after just 2 seconds. Later, I came across news about Steve. He had been gradually sidelined from managing the company by the top executives. After that, there was no more news of him. And then I met someone. His name is Mark. He is a younger brother, 3 years younger than me. Coincidentally, not only did he live upstairs from me, we also attended the same middle school. It's just that I had graduated before he started freshman year. Our high school homeroom teacher, after my senior year, became his homeroom teacher. Mark often heard the teacher recounting interesting stories from our time. Of course, there were individual stories singled out. Like mine, Mark said the teacher mentioned that I talked the most. What did they say about me? I was curious because of his mysterious expression. We'll talk about it later. I admit, I was intrigued by him. Later, I received numerous awards, and during an interview, the host asked a very personal question. Is Ms. Daisy single? I gazed into the audience, locking eyes with a pair of clear and bright eyes. My husband is waiting for me to get off work.